The next computer revolution is being built, and the race is on to figure out who gets there first. Today I talked to Andre Saraiva, head of theory and product development. In this conversation, we break down what quantum actually is without the hype, why silicon changes everything about cost and scale, and what it means for people in CS and AI who are wondering if this space is a promising part that they should pay attention to. You should approach this with curiosity and not necessarily you need to be a physics PhD to get in. I hope you enjoyed this conversation and please send your comments, questions to Andre. Thank you so much. I heard about your company and about your job because I found out this article in the Wall Street Journal talking about this new funding from the quantum industry. And I said, well, everyone talks about quantum, but what is the honest answer to someone who's heard that for 10 years and stopped believing in it? What is quantum computing so special?
hmm Thank you very much, and thanks for organizing this, David. What makes quantum special, I think, it's slightly easier to explain nowadays than it was at the beginning of my career. Basically, the quantum physics is cool and we can discuss it, but the fact that you're doing computation with an entirely new principle opens new windows and new doors, right? And it was hard for me to make this case maybe 20 years ago when we started doing this. But nowadays, with GPU acceleration and how that led to the AI revolution, people really resonate with that. So you can imagine that quantum is compared to classical computers is like the new level of what GPU brought to computing. It's not only a new architecture. In the case of quantum, it's computing with entirely new principles, and that allows you to do algorithms that you wouldn't have done before. That's basically it.
So I would like to understand, for example, in relation to a GPU. I know a GPU runs process in a parallel way, but then
hmm
the promise of quantum is some sort of parallelization or more running things simultaneously.
Yeah. So I'm gonna put my my reputation at risk here because I'm gonna give you an explanation that everybody in my field criticizes, but I actually quite like. It's wrong. It's a wrong explanation. I'm gonna give you the wrong explanation, and then I'm gonna tell you what's wrong about it. Right? I think
Sweet.
it's easier to understand like this. So the wrong explanation that everybody loves because it makes it easy to understand is that imagine that you have a problem and you're trying to find the solution of the problem by brute force testing several answers to that problem. A quantum computer, because you have this ability to create highly entangled superpositions of all the states or all the possible answers, you can test all of these answers at once. That's the easy, like highly parallelized argument for why quantum computers are so powerful. The reality is a lot more complicated than that. Mostly because you, even if you were able to create this super large superimposed state and test all the answers at once, you're still, as soon as you try to measure whether you're in one state or another, you're collapsing the whole wave function. So you don't get to actually observe all of the different potential answers. So it's a bit more complicated. The art of coming up with efficient quantum algorithm is much more complex than that. It does pass by creating this initial large entangled states,
Hmm.
um, but you also have to somehow, after testing all of this, have a way to, without measuring, just looking at all the behavior of all those particles after tested, infer something smart. And typically, this something smart you're trying to infer is not the answer to necessarily a question. It might be something more like, okay, are the answers of this type or this type, or like you're basically trying to come up with algorithms in a slightly different way that you would do with GPUs, right? So
Yeah.
I would say it is highly parallelized. I actually like this argument, but it's not quite the same as you would think with GPUs, right?
Yes. Yes. And um something that I understood like back in time, but it is not, I don't know if it's accurate, is the fact that basically a qubit represents simultaneously two words, right? The 0 and 1 that
Mm-hmm.
you will need to represent with 2 bytes,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then the key problem that all the industry is trying to solve is how to make it stable, the qubit, which is, I guess, putting more energy in a particle, I don't know, and then that particle is can be in two levels, right?
Mm. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. There's a lot. This is a very loaded question. There's a lot behind this. Um, One, it is true that the kind of the fundamental principle of qubits is that they can be in a superposition of 0 and 1. Um, it is just this is just true. There isn't much more intuition to this. It's just something that we have observed in the lab for 100 years. So now we know for sure that this is a fact. There isn't much more to understand there. Um, the true power of quantum computing comes when you're taking many of those and putting in superposition states, because now you have basically every potential superposition of all these groups of particles.
Hmm.
That's many more opportunities for states than you have in a classical world. Um, it is not, the superposition itself is not something special. There's stuff that is not quantum that also has superposition properties, things like the polarization of light and so on. So if you go back to your basic physics, the principle of superposition you learn when you're learning electromagnetism, is not
Hmm.
quantum mechanics. So it is this highly entangled state that has value to it. The problem with the highly entangled state is it is very much a non-classical state, and you don't have any intuition of it in your life because you've never seen one, because they don't survive. They're they are true to one or a few particles, but as soon as you expose those particles to reality, to us observing it, to noise and everything, this states there's a process called decoherence, right? Basically, the states, they lose these observable quantum behaviors and become just run of the mill, flip the coin, sometimes a zero, sometimes a one. And you can do computation with that as well, but it's not as useful. um, the fight with quantum computing is, the few particles that we know and observe good quantum behaviors, to be able to control them and do the computations that you want fast enough that they didn't decohere,
Hmm.
or if there is decoherence or there is errors, that you perform some error correction on it. and the
Right.
and the art of error correction is sort of the holy grail at the moment. Everyone is trying variants of that, and quantum variants of that, and that's what makes it very deep, because error correction already exists in your router has error correction. Like, we use it in normal classical data processing. The error correction that we're talking about here has some pretty nasty rules that make it a lot more difficult and also more fun.
Of course, I bet it's because what you were saying of how fast you need to operate to extract information before the system collapses, right? Is it because
Yeah.
of that?
Well, yeah. So that's what we had been trying to do for a long time. This nowadays has a name. They call it NISQ, NISQ, noisy intermediate scale computers. It's the
Hmm.
ones that where you're trying to just like do as fast as possible your calculations, entangle as many qubits as you can, as fast as you can, and just beat the coherence. But the coherence happens in the scale of best case scenario milliseconds, often microseconds. So really, the complexity of the circuits that you can do in this way is not very deep, and
Hmm.
these are circuits that if you compare what you can do with that and with the GPU almost always beats the quantum computer in that. So the field has shifted quite a bit into trying to implement this error correction, which would be okay. As soon as your decoherence starting to kick in, you try to detect that something is happening and correct for it and recover that highly entangled state. And that's a much more complex task, especially in quantum computing. There's some rules in quantum physics that are actually not that hard to understand. That make it harder for you to do. One simple one is you can understand one rule very easily. Take the easiest way to do classical error correction is just called the repetition code. If I
Yeah,
want to write down a zero, instead of writing down a zero, I write down three zeros. If one of them flips and something funny happens, I I still have two zeros, and so okay, the majority is zeros. It must have been a zero. I correct this guy. That's the simplest, easiest way to think about it. In quantum, I cannot do that because if I try to observe one of my qubits, I collapse it.
I see.
So you already start not with the same rules that you have in classical computers, and all of a sudden you're starting from scratch the whole science of error correction, which is a gigantic field in mathematics. You know?
Ah, that's so interesting, and I bet it's very key what you said, that that's where the industry is right now, right? There is a lot of noise. You find a lot of noise, but paying attention to what actually matter, what is the problem you trying to
Yeah,
remove is key.
yeah, and it's hard to. Of course, everybody's busy with their heads down trying to get it to work. So it's hard to keep up sometimes if you're just coming into quantum computing, trying to keep up with who is doing a good job at that and how that's progressing. It's highly technical. Often you need a very strong basis in multiple disciplines to understand
Hmm.
it. Mathematics, physics,
Physics.
electrical engineering. Um, it's basically nowadays no single team is built around this theme without at least two or three different people with two or three different backgrounds and expertises, and it's almost creating its own thing. It's like the quantum computer. You can imagine computer science one day was kind of a mashup of
Hmm.
electrical mathematics and so on. Now quantum computing science is becoming that kind of the next level of that.
You have told me very interesting things, right? That relative to GPU is more being able to calculate simultaneously, not in a parallel way. That the main problem is the collapsing systems and how fast you can retrieve answers. All that feels, as you said, very removed from the normal CS AI person. Do you think there is some opportunity for people who are not into physics, or they are into CS or AI, to try to get curious around it, or we should
Absolutely.
wait?
Absolutely. My team nowadays is not made of people of physicists, and I'm a physicist, but I'm a dinosaur here. All the my new hires, they are all computer scientists, software engineers, mathematicians, and so on. The thing is, because quantum computing is new, you're asking me about the physics of qubits, but when you're discussing AI, you don't discuss the semiconductor physics of MOSFET and currents and so right. You just take it for
Yes.
granted, right? Because we're in this phase where we're trying to get the qubits to work properly and in enough scale to solve big problems, all eyes on the physics, right? But as we're building this, there is a gigantic effort behind it that is you don't need to know anything about the physics of qubits to support. the runtime. You have to reinvent runtime. You have to reinvent how systems are designed. The classical computing uh, issues around the coding, around runtime, around the truly massive quantum computations is gigantic and not resolved at all. And there's all these questions about what's the instruction set that
Hmm.
will make sense for the different architectures, right? There's people whose architecture, the instructions come in, they're programming in FPGA. There's people who are building quantum computers that are very slow, so the instruction set is
Yeah,
very easy. Some of them are very fast and cryogenic, so you have limits to the power consumption that you can. It's a world, it's a gigantic world, and I would say it's the most interesting thing happening in computer science as well.
I totally agree. And the fact that it is still something that is in the intersection of many things. The thing is not still completely foreign. Like CS, pretty much an AI is an old thing, an old idea that is very tangible, right?
Yeah,
And we
yeah,
have whole businesses around it. What you're
yeah,
telling me, what I interpret is because this is still information, you
yeah.
can come up with reinventing new ways, for example, around the runtime, right? S-
Absolutely, yeah.
Um,
And in a certain sense, it's an opportunity for you to invent it right. Because now, with all the lessons learned over the how many decades has computer science existed, right? We now know better, right? It's like there's a lot of legacy decisions that we now have in computer science that nobody knows exactly how we ended up with those precise decisions. And things, some things were decided in a very thoughtful and future proof way, like the architecture itself, like von Neumann architecture and things like that. But how we ended up with the way that we do memories, how we ended up with the way that the, there were other options, right? And GPU is one proof. Like
yeah.
GPU, the, from a fundamental computer science perspective, CPUs and GPUs are not that different. You have a difference in how you implement the architecture, but it's still a separation of memory in compute, and you still have
Hmm.
sort of similar instructions and so on, right?
Yes, absolutely. I want to jump real quick to the one of the claims that impressed me from the rack, which is less than $1 per qubit. I think that's striking. Uh, like how do you as a product, how do you think about bringing that claim as a reality? Like how do you guys doing it differently?
Yeah. So let me tell you one thing before I say anything else. I I am not 100% sure that I will be technically successful in what I'm doing. Right? It's a very challenging problem. What I am 100% sure is that if I am technically successful in what I'm doing, it's gonna cost less than $1. Right?
Amazing.
Right. So you can bet that that sentence is wrong, but the only way to bet in it is by telling me, Andre, you are not going to be able to build it because you're like breaking fundamental laws or something like that. If I do build it, it's going to cost less than $1, right? Where does this affirmation comes from? It comes from actually Moore's law, right?
Hmm.
The thing with Moore's law is that all everyone is paying attention to the rate at which you double the computational power and forget that it has one rule to it, which is under the constraints of fixed size, fixed cost, right?
Yes.
That's the scaling in versus scaling out that people are calling now. Like Jensen Huang loves the scaling out and scaling in or whatever. Um, somewhere in classical computing, this still very clearly the driver, but the scaling in is becoming increasingly difficult for fundamental physics reasons, right? It's related to thermal budgets and power dissipation on the chips and so on. with uh, with quantum computing, we, most modalities, most technologies hit that difficulty much earlier, right? You have, for instance, Google, Amazon, a number of IBM. They are all trying to build quantum computers out of superconducting circuits.
Mm-hmm.
Those superconducting circuits, they have to remain at 10 millikelvin, which means as soon as you're cramming around 100 qubits, you're already hitting the turbo budget, and then you have to start scaling out. So, by most estimates, you have some really useful applications as soon as you have around 100,000 to a million qubits. For if you can only fit 100 in one fridge, you're very quickly filling up full, football fields with these qubits. So it's very important to start from when you're building this. You have to start from, okay, how do I keep the costs accessible?
Mm-hmm.
This is not just a scientific experiment, right? It is not meant to be like Slack,
Mm-hmm.
like an accelerator. It's meant to be a, a system that eventually is going to be a commodity. Every university should have one, and people should be getting creative with
Yes.
it, right? And the solution that we found took us very long to build it. It's so that's why we're sort of in qubit counts we're behind the Googles and IBMs of the world, but it's based on traditional CMOS technology, right? So traditional CMOS technology, first of all, the manufacturing scaling is insane.
Mm-hmm.
It, you would be hard pressed to think of any. Oh, I don't know if the noise is picking up for you. I'm outside here, and there's a siren going on.
You're hearing the hood. Yeah.
Yeah, uh, but the you would be hard pressed to think of any system that mankind has built that has a billion components to it and is not a cell phone or
Yes.
a chip on a computer, right? It's basically the only time that humanity has managed to get this level of engineering reliability, right? Um, and then on top of that, there is the intrinsic physics of the particle that we chose, which is the spin of an electron. The spin of an electron turns out it's very quantum. It likes to remain in superposition, and it doesn't suffer much from the noise in its environment. Like
Mm-hmm.
an electron in silicon, the spin of that electron feels almost as if it was in vacuum, as if there was no silicon whatsoever. So you get all the manufacturing, but the spins are quite good. And we, and I'm gonna tell you something now that is gonna sound weird. We managed to show that that spin can be coherently controlled up to 1 Kelvin, right? So 1 Kelvin is 1 degree above the absolute zero.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like, okay, yeah, that's not much better, right? 10 millikelvin, 1 Kelvin is still pretty cold, and you still
Mm-hmm.
need a massive fridge. Then you need to have a mathematical mind to understand this. Not deeply mathematical, but at least an engineering degree helps here. Um, at 10 millikelvin, going from 10 millikelvin to 1 Kelvin, even if you assume Carnot cycle, right?
Mm-hmm.
Carnot cycle, the efficiency is inverse in temperature. 10 millikelvin to 1 Kelvin is 100-fold increase in temperature. That would be 100-fold increase in efficiency of that fridge. In reality, Carnot is an idealization, right? The
Mm-hmm.
fridges that
Yes.
we have at the moment, they operate their efficiency goes more like power 2, power 3 of temperature. So that's a million fold. By going to 1 Kelvin, you have a million-fold more cooling power in the same system. Now you're changing the physical principle, right? Like now you're okay. I'm not gonna hit a problem with 100 qubits. I'm gonna hit a problem with a million qubits or 10 million
Yes.
qubits, right? It's a completely different scale. So that those kind of early scientific findings were the sort of the foundation in the technology that we built. But with the mindset, don't look at the qubits and how much you know about the physics of that particle. Look at the problem that the user cares about and how much is that user willing to pay for that problem. That's the metric. As soon as you do
Yes.
that, you basically core yourself to like one or two technologies.
That's so interesting, and I appreciate you going into the details because basically you guys find out a particle that is more stable. That's what it sounds to me, right? That the spin can be controlled better. And on top of that, you are finding a roadmap to reduce the cost of scaling out, which is all these huge fridges and all the system that comes to it.
That's right.
I really like the reframe you do at the end of your answer, which is focus on the problems that we're trying to solve. And I want to ask you a final question, which is how far we are from, for example, having these huge optimization problems, right? And being able to plug a quantum computer and ask a question.
Yeah, yeah, good question. I would say, all right, again, this is a difficult question to answer. Imagine I ask you without a computer, just with paper and pencil, to do the math of whether you can build ChatGPT,
Oh no,
right?
improbable, yeah.
So that's that. I'm just translating to you what you're asking me, right?
Yes.
I'll try to answer, but it's a very difficult question. So it's in a world where you don't have the quantum computers to play with, you are removing one of the key elements in understanding computer complexity, which is the heuristics, right? It's like
Yeah.
it, problems that you don't necessarily have mathematical guarantees around, but you understand how they play in practice. Um, if you remove that, actually optimization is one of the problems that becomes harder for a quantum computer to be disruptive. Turns out that optimization with GPUs are pretty good, and the advantage that you would get with a quantum computer is only quadratic, which means it would have to be a massive problem for a quantum computer to be more useful than a classical computer. People are working on trying to get better algorithms for this. Okay, like Google
Hmm.
has good work on that direction that is progressing well. But the problems where you might have a much earlier advantage are the ones where quantum computers have an exponential advantage, and there hasn't been that many problems that have been figured out at this point. Some of them are mostly because we're using our intuition at this point. We don't have the quantum computers, so problems in chemistry should be early advantages. Material science and solid state physics in general, um, things like high temperature superconductivity. The interesting thing is all of them have this element of being potentially transformational for mankind, right? If you think about it, yeah, mankind is the eras are set by the materials that we control, right? Like the Stone Age and Iron Age and Silicon Age nowadays. So you could imagine that a technology that can change the way we interact and control matter could lead to a new era for mankind altogether, right? So that's one of the biggest drivers behind quantum computing,
Hmm.
plus its potential cryptographic application, intelligence, and so on, of course.
Right. Yeah. Hopefully, you don't wake us up some day saying we crack it and then all our passwords are in danger, right?
Yeah, well, yeah. People are being smart about moving to post quantum cryptography, but it's not as trivial as people think. There's a lot of old messages being saved to be cracked later, and there's still a very strong reliance on traditional cryptographic methods that will. I would say I would be surprised if they have more than 5 to 10 years left in them. think it's more. It's starting to look more like 5 years left.
I see. Um, final question. What would be your suggestion for someone who is curious, like how to get it started, where you will
Yeah,
start?
that's a good question. Well, if you're in Bay Area, come and visit. We just
Absolutely.
set shop here in Palo Alto in College Avenue, just 2 blocks away from Stanford. I think the key thing, one of your questions was quite good. Like, do I need to be a physicist? Do I need to know quantum physics already? I would say definitely not at this point. It is now a full fledged computational science effort, and all everything that was useful for computers is now useful for quantum computers as well. The easiest pathways, I would say, through the universities. Most universities nowadays have some sort of quantum effort. For instance,
Hmm.
Stanford has Q Farm. Berkeley also has a newly created quantum program there. Um, and the other option is actually reaching out to companies. Most companies are. This is one of the hardest talents to find. Right, talent in quantum computing is one of the hardest to find. The salaries are very high at the moment because of the flow of funding. Everybody is trying to hire the same few really smart kids. So right now, I think most companies would take the time to educate a new enthusiastic student or professional, young professional, or old professional. We have a lot of people flipping careers at this point as well.
Yes, and it's one of the fields that probably is willing to train people, right? Right now, nobody's taking, or few people are
Oh,
trying to take juniors or
yeah.
CS or AI.
Yeah, it's still built by still mostly the legends in this field are still people who lived a very long academic career. Right, I was a professor back in Brazil in Rio de Janeiro. Then I moved to Australia, where we founded the company. Now I moved here. I After I don't know how many decades of teaching, I'm now no longer teaching right now, but it's most people are very familiar with training people from scratch, and I know something that people in the industry don't know. I know what the power of an angry, tired PhD student trying to make a name for themselves. I know the power that that has. It's not you don't find career professional engineers with that kind of hunger.
Yes, yes, that hunger. Yeah, that thing that keeps you awake at night and curious. And yeah, I know that.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate this time. It was very clarifying many ends. One day I talked to a friend who is a PhD and he's in quantum, and he basically, I asked the same question, like, I'm curious about the industry. Why do you have to do? And he painted like a bleak, very removed way. But you give me more like hope. I'm a eternal student. I want to actually work in hard problems.
One thing
And
one thing I can tell you is the industry is now. We are our company very much, but some others in the industry as well are starting to hire a lot of people without PhDs as well.
okay, okay, this is good news for my audience. I have a couple friends that are super nerds and will love to transition, and definitely I would love to visit you and know more a little bit more of Dirac. I really appreciate this time, Andre. I know you're super busy, and hopefully we can keep talking as soon as Dirac breaks the market.
All right, absolutely. Thank you very much, David. Have a good day, mate.
I appreciate it, man.